Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we finally get to talk about an actual win that happened. It's crazy. It's been a while, right? The last time we were doing this would have been the Carolina game last year. I don't even think I recorded for that. So it's been a long time since we've talked about a regular season victory for the Jaguars, and man, this was I'll call it a brutal game because this was pretty freaking close to being a complete disaster for Jacksonville, and I was moments away from eating my words. I went on Twitter after they went up 34-20, and I just jokingly put out a post saying, "Hey, we're 1-4 now. That's great." And then as soon as I look back at the game, it's a 60-yard throw down the field for the Colts. They run in the touchdown with Trey Sermon. The Jaguars go 3 and out, and then the Colts go 65 yards down the field for a touchdown. And this all happens in 2 minutes of the game. And I'm like, oh, well, this is our next step in the evolution of Jaguars football and how obnoxious it can get. But, credit to the offense. And I want to say the offense more so because there were times where it was Trevor Lawrence stepping up, right? There were times, though, where it was a Tank Bigsby or even an Ezra Cleveland in this game stepping up, right? This was a team effort, at least on the offensive side of the ball, and they didn't let the game getting out of hand at the end stop them from closing the deal out. And so I'm really impressed with that side of the ball, and we're going to talk a lot about it here. I apologize once again. I have had this cough for weeks. I've tried everything. It has not gone away, so I apologize for that. But getting into my notes here, we're going to go through each position just in general. We'll spend more time on certain ones compared to others, and then just kind of talk about where does the team sit here? How do we go forward from this game? Because now that they're 1-4, you finally learned how to win again, which still should not be happening, right? Year 3, you should know how to win by this point in the coaching tenure. We have 2 games coming up that that are winnable. And we've got other games that are going to be difficult too. But if this team can turn things around and get to 3-4, we might be talking about them at least trying to compete for a playoff spot, which would be a very different story from what we've dealt with the last 4 weeks. So, starting with my notes here. Trevor Lawrence, first guy to talk about. You look at the stats, and this looks like a pretty dang good game from him. And it was, right? This was a huge improvement compared to what he's been doing recently. He got 28 completions, 34 attempts, right? This is a really impressive stat. Over 80% of his passes were completed to receivers, 371 yards. I believe that comes close or is the most he's had in his career. He had 2 touchdowns and he had 1 interception. Now, this is a really good performance. I just want to iterate that very clearly. But I do want to at least just say, because I have to say it, this is the kind of thing we have to see consistently, right? If we go into the next few weeks and we go back to 160 yards a game or 190 or whatever it is, it's not acceptable, right? And you have to play closer to this level than to 160, right? Numbers like that. You should be nowhere near that going forward. And so it's good to see Lawrence take a step in the right direction, have a really dominant game in terms of volume, but that has to continue. And so this is something where, yeah, it feels like we're kind of getting out of the woods with this performance, especially because I would say earlier on in the game where you saw more of those mistakes or just, missing a guy that's open, like the Gabe Davis throw, or we'll call it a non-throw because he's wide open for a first down. Trevor Lawrence throws in the triple coverage on the play. It's that kind of stuff that's still frustrating, but there was not nearly as much of it in this game. And Trevor was finally able to start making some of those big throws, start making some of the layups as well. And that was a big reason why this offense was so productive, right? Because they were able to actually threaten the defense in a multitude of ways. And it's just been broken the first 4 games. But man, I mean, you see the upside here, right? When Trevor Lawrence is playing a really good brand of football, You've got an effective backfield. Tank Bigsby having a dominant day on the ground, which we're going to talk about more in detail in just a second. Brian Thomas Jr. had like an 85-yard receiving touchdown this game. And if you watched, I'm not sure everyone here has watched it, but I do some content for another channel called The Fantasy Trading Room. If you go check that channel out, I put up a video last week about Brian Thomas Jr. And so it's a film breakdown, just talking about how he's been playing. It's mainly for fantasy football, but it's still really good to evaluate how a player is performing, especially if you're a Jaguars fan. We're talking about a Jaguars player over there. But I would definitely recommend you watch that. Brian Thomas Jr. has been open a lot of the time on the field. He has had a lot of yards that have been quite simply missed by Trevor Lawrence up to this game. And it's nice to see Lawrence starting to hit him more often. It's nice to see Thomas be such a big part of this offense because he is the kind of player that can flip a game on its head. We have seen that now at least 3 times this year. It's great stuff, right? So awesome to see from him. Christian Kirk also had a great day. We can go to player stats and take a look at it, but Kirk, 4 receptions, 22 yards a pop on average, and 88 yards. Another big day from him. Travis Etienne, also involved in the receiving game quite heavily. Now, here's the interesting conversation we'll talk about before we get to the offensive line, where I mainly want to note one player's performance that I think is really noteworthy after this game. You probably know who that is already. But we got to talk about this backfield because we're told Travis Etienne's RB1, right? That's what the team told us after this game, too. They said Travis is their guy. He got 6 carries. Well, Tank Bigsby got 13. And yes, averages way off, right? Bigsby was a lot more productive in this game. I think that it's been interesting to watch on film. For the first 4 weeks, I did this in the last couple days. I just pulled up the carries from these guys. Well, I think that Bigsby has been probably a better runner this year so far. It's almost as if the offensive line blocks worse when ETN is on the field. I don't know what it is about it, but a lot of the time that's kind of the way it feels. And then the roles of these players, you talk about who's carrying the ball up the middle. It's often ETN, which is not what they drafted Bigsby for, in the sense that Bigsby is supposed to have that role. He's not supposed to be the guy who's bouncing it outside all the time. So I think we see Bigsby being a lot more creative. And so that's been a big part of why he's had these huge plays. That's how he got the touchdown today, was having really good vision and juking out a lot of guys on that play. He's just been really decisive, and he's been, I think, with that decisiveness, a lot faster than you'd expect. He's a tough runner, too. He's going to bulldoze through people. He got the name Tank for a reason. It's impressive stuff from him. But I think this is something to monitor very closely. Because if I recall, I'm not trying to say that it's a done deal, Travis Etienne's getting traded by the trade deadline. But if I recall, when James Robinson and Travis Etienne were here, it was close to split backfields when they were playing together. There was a lot of talk about how great both players were, right? And then all of a sudden, it took a really quick turn, and James Robinson ended up pretty much not even being a part of the game plan one week, and then he was traded to the Jets. I don't know if it goes like that this year, but I think it's something to at least watch out for, because with how successful Tank Bigsby has been in this offense, with him being the guy that Doug Peterson has drafted as well, and Trent Baalke was a part of the ETN pick, right? Although I think that was a pick that was more credited towards Urban. The point is that Tank Bigsby is more of the guy they brought in than what Travis Etienne is. So I wonder if we could see a situation where Etienne just kind of all of a sudden gets out-carried one game and then ends up getting moved to another team by the trade deadline. And a lot of this also depends on, how productive how successful is this team early on, right? If they go into London And let's say they lose one of those games or they lose both of them. All of a sudden, you're probably looking at people getting put on the trade block. You're probably looking at that being a possibility. Because if the season is over, then do what you can to be able to regroup for the future, right? You're not investing a ton of resources into this year. If they feel like Bigsby is the better player, you might as well trade ETN in that situation. But I do want to just say, I'm not saying they need to do this, right? I want to make that clear. I'm not advocating that they trade Travis Etienne, and I'm going to say this. I reserve my opinion on that until I get to watch the film. Because while I got to watch both of them a little bit, I want to go back to it. I want to watch a game like this week, and I want to be able to see if Etienne's just having an issue as a runner. Is he maybe not having as good a vision? Is he just not in a good role? Or what is the reason for the disparity here? Because Bigsby has been far more productive than Etienne. He's had far more breakout home run plays than what Etienne has had. I think that's got to be noted. Now, getting to the offensive line, which can't see him here, but Ezra Cleveland, shout out to him, had an awesome play where it felt like one of the first times we've seen like this high-level physicality from the offensive line in a while. We saw him run up to Tank Bigsby, who was being stalled out, grab him. It was around like the 10-yard line, and just carries him forward through the defenders. And as Ezra's going down to the ground and he's tripping, he throws Tank Bigsby into the end zone for a touchdown. Just an awesome play. And Ezra is, I think, going to be someone that we've got to check out on the film here soon. This week, if I get to it, and I should be able to get to it, it's probably going to be the backfield. We'll probably do a dual video where we look at Travis Etienne and we look at Tank Bigsby this season and just kind of compare what they've done, probably mostly based off of this week 5 game. But Ezra Cleveland's on the list. He's a guy we got to check out. Devin Lloyd was another one. These are some guys I think have stood out quite a bit this year. But want to give him a shout out. Also want to say, go check out the Colts here. 0, 0, 0, 0, right? No sacks. They were not able to get any sacks on Trevor Lawrence today. So this is great stuff, right? We love to be shocked in this way because you watch this channel, you know the top thing that I complained the top thing I complained about all offseason was the offensive line. And I still think they're missing a lot. I think they need to be more dominant in the run game, which is one of the big reasons why I was a proponent for the Jaguars trading for Ezra Cleveland before they ever even did it. Because that's an area of strength for him, even if he's struggled a little bit this year compared to previous seasons. But I do think that the offensive line, when things go right, can be effective, can at least be average in the NFL, and I think you're seeing maybe even a little bit more ceiling than that right now. Now, getting to the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I've got to start by shouting out Trayvon Walker, right? 3 sacks in this game. Huge performance from him. That's a career performance for Trayvon Walker. Now, I tried to find all the clips of these sacks because I think it's important to have context on how we're getting, right? Because especially when you have a guy who is such a mismatch for a lot of tackles, especially the ones who aren't as big or just kind of lack the strength that you'd like to see, it's often going to result in really big games. And that's one of the huge things about Trayvon Walker, where he's going to be successful is when he gets those mismatch opportunities. Now, the guy he went up against is not a bad player at all. It was Braden Smith, the right tackle for the Colts. He's graded out well on PFF for almost a decade at this point consistently. And Trayvon Walker had his way with him, right? He had a great game. He had an awesome bull rush. It was the first play that I decided I'm just going to watch Trayvon Walker on this play. I look at him. He bull rushes through the tackle, just completely ripping apart the guy's anchor. Gets to Joe Flacco, strips it. Josh Allen almost gets it back for a touchdown. Really good stuff from Trayvon Walker. Now, I didn't see the first sack, so I'm not going to say anything about that just because I have no context to provide. The third sack was essentially just a complete failure by the right tackle. I do think that's at least worth noting. Like, you can go back and watch the play, and the play is basically just Trayvon Walker running in a straight line towards Joe Flacco, who retreats like 20 or 30 yards and gets sacked. It's still a good play, right? I'm not taking away from that. But when I'm looking at like the film on a guy, especially with our pass rushers, I want to see a multitude of ways that you're going to win in the future. I want to see new ways that you can challenge a tackle, because the more ways that you can challenge someone makes you less predictable, because you have many ways that you can beat them. I still think watching Trayvon Walker, and I'll have to see that first sack, right? Because there may have been, some great pass rush move on that. And not that he doesn't have pass rush moves. He is a power rusher, right? He has a good arsenal of those moves. And I think that ultimately, like, watching this game, he's winning in a lot of the same ways still. So am I going to sit here, with 5 sacks on the season? I'm going to still be happy, right? I'm going to say that's a really good season so far for him. It's nice to see, but I'm not going to necessarily sit here and say that he has a huge arsenal of pass rush moves. I just don't think that's the case right now. I think that's still something we got to see. But that does not mean that he cannot win in the NFL or be an impactful edge rusher. And today, he was a very impactful edge rusher. Now, outside of that, kind of the same thing for this defense, right? You did have one more sack from Josh Allen, but this defense just not generating turnovers, not really changing the course of the game. Now, Trayvon did have the turnover. He strip sacked Joe Flacco, so that was the first one, I think, of this year that the Jaguars have had. But this team's just struggling on defense. The secondary can't create turnovers. The secondary is getting lit up a lot of the time. They're struggling because I think a big part of it is the injury to Tyson. That's a huge part of this, because you don't have your guy to go up against the number one receiver. And then at the same time, Antonio Johnson just not having a good season so far. And Ronald Darby, he's been all right, but he is what he is, right? You're not paying him a ton of money because he's not some sort of great football player. Like, he is a guy that you can start on the field and has some upside. And then your other guy you're talking about is Andre Cisco. And, well, Cisco, I think, had a little bit better of a game, or maybe was more involved than I've seen recently. I didn't watch a ton of him, and I still saw him getting burned at times on the field. So there's some questions about this secondary, right? And it's fair to have right now, because it's been a struggle, right? I'm curious if it changes. But I think this is probably going to be the biggest Achilles heel for this team, unless Trevor still struggles, because I think, obviously, having a quarterback that's not playing well is probably about the worst thing that can happen to your team. Just watch the Browns. But if that's not the case, and if Trevor's able to get back on track and keep playing at this level, the secondary is the biggest issue. You look at the linebacker core, you've got players stepping up. You got players that are doing well out there that aren't even really starters. And then Devin Lloyd and Foyesade Aluakon, 2 great players, right? It's one of the best linebacker duos in the NFL. So that's a really strong unit. I think there's a lot of really good players up front, although I question the depth on the defensive line, especially on edge, because you're really just putting defensive tackles on the edge. And then it's the secondary, right? That's going to be the biggest issue. That's going to be the area that I think when we get out of the season and we're looking at what we need to invest in, it might be the highest on the list, depending on the offensive line. And I think offensive line probably should go higher. I care more about how I'm surrounding my quarterback than, trying to help out the other side of the ball. I'll be honest, that would be more of my philosophy. But I think that ultimately investing in the secondary, both at corner and at the safety position, maybe even 2 safeties, it's going to be a pretty huge deal for Jacksonville. Now, final thing I'll note on players from this game. got to give a shout out to Cam Little, right? Made the big kick at the end of the game. I think it was like 49 yards. It was not a gimme, and ended up nailing it. Jacksonville won because of it. Jacksonville was able to take the clock down to about 20 seconds. We're able to finally stop Indianapolis. And if he doesn't make that kick, that game might be a loss in overtime, right? This team was really close to losing this game. In fact, actually, if he didn't make that kick, they might have won it in regulation, just given where they would have been on the field. So it's a big deal, right? And it's good to see from Cam Little, him getting in that situation, him getting that confidence. I really like the pick when they got him, and I think it's working out pretty well for Jacksonville so far. Now, my general notes from this game, which I'll be honest, when the Jaguars win a game, there's not going to be as many like big takeaways because you got less problems to worry about, right? Like, we're not talking about Trevor Lawrence playing a terrible game this week. We're not talking about Christian Kirk being a non-factor. Like, he was out there playing well. Same for Trevor. So a lot of things change. My takeaway, first and foremost, can we just go back to the old logo and wear the throwbacks forever? That's my joking takeaway, but I really wish this team would do that, I will be honest. But I think the biggest thing for me, this team should be relieved from winning a game. They can't get hung over off of it, though. We've seen a lot of times from this Jaguars team where they'll finally get that moment, and then they'll show up the next week, and it's like they took the week off. And I don't want to see that from this team. So that's probably the biggest question I have. There's a lot of work to be done. Just because you beat Indy at home does not mean all of a sudden you're back in the playoff race. We're 1-4. And for us to get back to 500, we have some easy games. But by the time we would get back, assuming we beat, I think it's the Packers. That's after this. Yeah, so it's the Bears, Patriots, both those in London, and then hosting the Packers. If we're able to do that, we've still got to face the Eagles on the road. We host the Vikings, who are undefeated. We go into Detroit, which is just a better team, straight up. We have the Texans at home, who we struggle with. We play the Titans, who I don't have to say anything about that anyway. The Jets, maybe that's not as hard of a game, right? And you start getting some easier games at the end of the season. But if you're able to make this run, you've got to hold up after that, right? There's a lot of obstacles ahead for this team, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I think they're going to go make a run and make the playoffs. I don't think they will. I still think this season is going to be a pretty big loss for the team. But it's possible, right? And that's what they got to be looking forward to, especially if Doug wants to keep his job, if Trent wants to keep his job. Trent's probably a little more safe, although I think they've got to do far more for either one of them to make it, if I'm being completely honest. But yeah, 2 weeks coming up. It's going to be early games. I think I'll actually be able to watch most of these, which is nice. It's been kind of hard to, just living in Missouri. We're not broadcasting 0-4 Jaguars games, now 1-4. But these are two beatable opponents coming up, right? The Bears, the Patriots, teams that are not juggernauts at this point, teams that you should be better than. If you can claw out both those victories, you'll come back home from London, a place where you have been mighty successful in recent years, and you'll be one game away from getting back to 500, and you just gotta find a way to win, right? So this is where we are. I'm kind of shocked that I won today. It was a battle of two very very strong curses. I feel like the Colts in Jacksonville and the Jaguars just not knowing how to win recently. And at the end of the day, the Colts curse in Jacksonville was stronger. Well, that's all I've got today. I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know your thoughts on the game. Does this change your opinion on the rest of the season? I will say right now, it does not for me. I think they've got to prove a lot more. I'll give them a chance, but I'm not expecting anything. That's where I stand. But I'd like to hear where you guys are at on it, what you think this team's going to do going forward. What's your record prediction? at this point? Which teams are they going to beat? All that sort of stuff. Do you think that something's going to happen in the backfield with Travis Etienne? Or is this just, one game where someone has the main role that's not Etienne and it flips back the next week? We'll see. Now, before we wrap up here, I do want to give a quick shout out to all of our channel members. Premier Nasir 904 from Until We Die rank. We have Mr. Dolphin from On the Prowl and everyone else who's involved. If you guys want to get on as a channel member, you can do that on the YouTube channel. There's 3 subscriptions available. All the information's on the screen, and really excited to have more people join as the season goes on. But that's all I've got today. Appreciate y'all watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.